Hello, everybody. You get a rare video of me, my face, instead of facing the other way. And I mean, the reason I do that, I'm not really trying to hide my face, but it's just more, my wife doesn't like me to make these videos, so I can only really make them when I'm out of the house. Um, she always asks, and it just gets really annoying and really stupid. So I just make them when I'm going to the shops. And I mean, I know nobody much watches them. It's more for my own benefit, but yeah, I'm at home alone, so I get to make a video. Yeah, get to see my face. Yeah. So, what do I want to talk about today? Well, I had some of my little rabbit holes that I go in. So one of them I was looking at some of the most powerful prehistoric civilizations that, and when I'm talking about prehistoric, I mean ones that were before we started recording history. So for a lot of people know that we only really started reliably recording history about 6,000 years ago, which coincides with the Jewish religion. And so Jews say that's when the world began, 6,000 years ago. And because we had almost nothing before that, a lot of people believe that. And in fact, not only Judaism, but both Christianity and Islam support that. So half the people in the world believe that the world first existed 6,000 years ago. So it might not be exactly half because I'm sure there's some Muslims, some Christians, some Jews that don't take that literally, and they think, oh, well, actually, it was a bit longer than that. That those 6 days to create the world and were a bit longer than six, solar days. That they were a bit longer, but even still, we really don't have very much recorded before that. So what I'm talking about are civilizations that are theorized to have existed more than 6,000 years ago, and I'm going to look at five examples. Now, I say at the start what the five are, and I'm going to give them a certain name. Now, I know they all go by different names. But the five I'm going to give the names of Prydain, and I hope I'm saying these right, Sumer, um, Kumari Kandan, I might be saying that completely wrong, Atlantis and Mu. Now, that's in order of most likely to be true to least likely. Now, because there is a little bit of speculation, different degrees for each one, as to whether they were real and whether they were what people say they were, how accurate the legends were. So I'm going to start with the one that is the most likely to be true, and that is Prydain. Now, I'm using the Welsh spelling of Prydain. It could well have had other names, but Prydain, for people not aware what I'm talking about there, that is an area that is today France, England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and a whole bunch of sea. So most of it, well, there might be a few other islands. I think there's Isle of Man and all that, but most of it is underwater now. And the area that's underwater, we actually have a name for. We call it the Doggerlands. And the reason we call it the Doggerlands is because we found out, oh, there were evidence of a civilization under there. And when people went fishing and diving and all that around the British Isles, and so like, oh, there was actually a civilization there. And some people thought it was Atlantis. Now it's been proven it wasn't Atlantis because the civilization under there were just simple hunter-gatherers, and there's no evidence of any technology whatsoever. But this actually lines up with the myths, because the myths of Prydain say that it was flooded with the Great Flood, and we talk about the Great Flood a lot. A lot of different parts of the world talk about a Great Flood, and we often think of that as the Younger Dryas. Sorry, it's about 11,400 years ago, roundabout. Now there is some claim that actually sank after that at 8,000 years ago. That doesn't line up with mythology, but who knows? There's claims it sunk 8,000 years ago. I don't know how it could have sunk 8,000 years ago if there wasn't a cataclysm. I don't think that I haven't read any explanation for why it would be 8,000 and not 11,400. So I'm just going to say they probably got their dates a bit wrong. And look, when you're talking about that long ago, I don't think it's ridiculous to be that much off because you're talking about, well, 8,000 compared to 11,000, it's less than 50%. It's within a margin of error. It's a pretty big error, even with that sort of date range. But you know, it's all right. And they have said it could have been 10,000. 10,000 is close to 11 within an error margin. But look, suffice to say, it's not Atlantis. Definitely not Atlantis. And in fact, if you look at the Welsh mythology around there, they actually talk about having a great flood and of everyone dying. Now, they didn't talk about having an ark. They talked about having a boat with just two people on it, who then became rivers. And then they talk about being repopulated with fairies. So, which became Aya. I think I'm saying that right, which of course it's actually not called Ireland, it's just called Aya in Irish. But, and then there were other, well, the rivers formed um, the rest of Prydain, and I'm not sure how people came out there, but anyway, they did. But the thing is that they talk about there being 1 billion people or 1.5 billion people died, and that's the bit that's in dispute. Some people say it was 1 million. Even that's in dispute. Because if you look back at what historians say the population of the Earth was, they say it was about 20,000. Depends on who you ask. But certainly the numbers that they've got for how many people were on Prydain is a lot higher than what historians suggest. And in fact, that is pretty much the only bit that's in dispute. Well, that and whether it was 8,000, 10,000, or 11,400 years ago, and whether it came about because of the Great Flood, also known as the Younger Dryas, or if the Great Flood is the Younger Dryas. Maybe they're two different events. Maybe the Great Flood's made up and the Younger Dryas is real. Maybe there was no flood with the Younger Dryas. So there's a few little things to dispute, but most of it, 100%. So we're talking about, this is like 90% plus confirmed and agreed with. No one really disputes it. Now, maybe it wasn't called Friday. Some people have even suggested that that was called Camelot, and that Camelot was a lot earlier than people suggest. Well, of course, we know that Camelot was in that general area. Because people talk about Tintagel Castle and all that. We know that there was a place called Aragon, which is now in France. That was a real place. And it used to be a country. There was a kingdom of Aragon. So there's a lot of factual basis for this, but there are a few little things that we're not quite sure about. We do argue about a few little bits about this, but not much. I mean, compared to the other four on this list that I'm going to talk about, this one we don't dispute very much. We used to, but then we found the Doggerlands. Now, obviously, that's a new name because the Doggers is a type of ships that I think has been around for 500 years or so. Certainly not 10,000 years or 8,000 years. It was definitely not called Doggerlands at the time. Now, whether it was called Prydain, that's just a name I'm using. It could well have had a different name. It could possibly have been Camelot. I don't know. I wasn't alive then. So that's that one. So I'm going in order of from the most likely to the least. And these are five great kingdoms. So the second one I'm going to mention, which is the second most likely, fourth least likely, is Sumer. Now, you can look in a history book and you can see Sumer. You can look on Google, on Wikipedia. You can Google. Sumer was, well, it's now Iraq. Now, Iraq still exists. We just had a war with them not that long ago. And most people know, well, before that it was Mesopotamia, there was Babylon, there was all sorts of places that are real historical places that were within this 6,000 year time period where we were recording things naturally. So what is there to dispute? And why do I have that after Prydain, which isn't in recorded history? And the reason is because Sumer doesn't claim to be 6,000 years old. Doesn't even claim to be 8,000, 10,000, or 12,000. Some people have even gone out to 14,000. It claims to be 500,000 years old, which is a lot longer, a lot older than anyone suggests. Now, of course, you can say, oh no, the first civilization started 6,000 years ago. Okay. Whatever you want to define civilization as. If you look at a historian, they will say, well, Sumer, if it did exist 500,000 years ago, people living in caves, there was probably 200 people there. That's what they'll tell you. But that's not what Sumerians say. That's not what modern day Iraqis say. And if you go to that area, you go to Iraq, you go to the Middle East, and you start saying, oh, Sumer was 6,000 years old. Oh, no, maybe 14,000. We go out to that extent. They will be angry with you. They'll be like, our culture is much older than that. It's 500,000 years old. Now, they don't claim to be the first culture. Humans have been around for 2.3 million years. Now, we don't know with any reliability what happened in that previous time. But the Sumerians say, well, they're not claiming the first 1.8 million years of human history. They're claiming 500,000 years on, not from 2.3 million to 500,000. There was humans around before that, and before that there were hominids. So they're not claiming that Sumer was around before there were humans. They're claiming humans were around for 1.8 million years, and then Sumer existed. And of course, Sumer was kind of the name for the world, so we just call it Sumerians. I'm not going to get into the whole thing there. No, so what evidence is there that it was actually around 500,000 years ago. There's a lot of stories, a lot of things that are possible, but not too many facts. And they're also the kind of populations that they talk about, and I was talking about Prydain being 1.5 billion, sorry. There are talks of Sumer being 10 billion, 20 billion, 40 billion. Now, is that well, population of Earth is 8.1 billion? How could Sumer, just this tiny little area of Iraq, be 40 billion? It was certainly described as being in the billions, not just 1 or 2 billion, but lots, 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 a lot bigger than the current population of Earth. Now, that wasn't 500,000 years ago. That was when the Great Flood came. So they're saying when the Great Flood came, there were at least 25 billion people on Sumer alone, let alone anywhere else. And yes, their population wiped out and went back to its post-flood levels. So they were an antediluvian society, meaning before the flood. They existed before the flood, and they existed after the flood. We know they existed after the flood. And they said their population that was after the flood was much smaller, like hundreds of times smaller than it was before the flood. And we also know that the flood actually was a cataclysmic mass extinction event. And 99% of all, not just all humans, but all plants and animals died. We don't know if it was exactly 99%. Was it 99.3? Was it 98%? Or 98.7? We don't know exactly. We also don't know how many percent of humans died out. So we don't know the pre-flood populations. In fact, we don't even know the post-flood. We know minimum of it, but we don't know the maximum because even though 6,000-year-old time period, that wasn't recorded for places like most of Africa, Australia, most of Asia, North and South America. We don't know how many people were living there. We don't know very much about anything. Now, we do know how big Iraq was at least 6,000 years ago. We don't know how big they were 11,400 years ago after the flood. We also don't know how many they were before the flood. So there is a possibility that it was that high. Now, I think, how could they possibly have had, even if it took them 25 billion, how could they possibly have had 25 billion in one city? Well, it wasn't one city, it was like 12 cities, but even still, how could they have that sort of population in one kingdom? It was a very big kingdom. But even with a very big kingdom, what didn't cover the whole Earth. So they must have had extremely powerful technologies, and they say they did. In fact, they talk about being able to fly, being able to shoot laser beams out of their fingertips, having mobile electricity, and having gods, which they called Anunnaki or gods on Earth, that gave them all this stuff. That they had incredible technology. And they also talk about a second species of humans, which they call the Adamu or red-headed ones, which a lot of people have linked with Neanderthals, and the timeline matches up. And they talk about a war with them and defeating them. We did defeat the Neanderthals. Now, current thought is that Neanderthals are actually stronger than we were. And we didn't beat them because they were weak. We beat them because there were more of us than there were of them. And a little bit of luck and plus some help from the Denisovans, who almost certainly at the time we called giants. And probably a little bit of help from various pygmy races. Of course, we called dwarves at the time. So dwarves were real, by the way, and so were giants, but they were just types of humans. And Neanderthals, of course, we called orcs. They were real. They were just a type of human, just a different species of human, which we've now discovered. They were real. There's no doubt that they were real. Anyone saying to you, "Oh, giants aren't real," well, half the people playing NBA are officially giants. Dwarves exist today. We call them little people. The only dispute is if there was a race of dwarves or a race of giants. Well, there is a race of giants alive today. They're called Slavs. Slavic people descend from Denisovans. Now, they might not seem all that tall to you, but that's only because they're part Denisovan. The full Denisovans would have been more like 9 feet tall, 2 meters 70. And that's the thing, that they were real. And okay, we don't have a race of giants, but in the island nations such as Indonesia, Philippines, and Malaysia, they had no natural predators and people got short. They got really small as a group. There were isolated pygmies in Brazil and the Amazon until very recently as well. And we know that these things were real. So Sumer fought a war against the Neanderthals. They were the main people fighting, and we won. So, and that happened before the Great Flood. We beat the Neanderthals about 30,000 years ago. It's when we wiped them out. There were a few isolated holdouts, and they ended up in Germany. They didn't originate from Germany. They originated from Africa, same as we did. Now, there's a few bits that are missing with that, but we know most modern humans, probably I personally, I haven't had it tested, but I would most likely have Neanderthal DNA in me. If you're watching this, you probably do as well. And we beat them. They were the superior model. We were the weaker model. We beat them. We were not as smart. We were not as strong. They were smarter and stronger, but there were less of them. We beat them by superior numbers. And it was a close run thing. We nearly died out. So if Sumer had been as weak as we suggest they were, we wouldn't have won. So I mean, there isn't. Look, don't get me wrong. Most people today make fun of the idea that they were 500,000 years old, and then they go, "Well, Anunnakis, not only talking about gods, you're saying it's aliens." And Zechariah Sitchin, who popularized the idea, he was a moron. He was a conspiracy theorist. And thing is, most parts of Sumer we just accept as fact. Iraq still exists, but some parts we don't accept. And the 500,000 years part, and the Anunnaki, and even the links with the Adamu who became Neanderthals probably, people dispute. So there are some elements that people dispute, and we can't really get clear, definitive answers on them either way. There's more to dispute about that than about Prydain, which I just talked about. But still, most of it, most people are in agreement with. I mean, because this one, unlike the other ones I'm going to talk about, and unlike Prydain, still exists today, the people didn't flee anywhere. They're still there. They're called Iraqis, and they're a very proud people, and they still have some of the ancient artifacts from the Sumerian time. In fact, when ISIS formed um, after 9/11 and after USA attacked Iraq and such, ISIS formed, and one of the things that they did was they destroyed ancient Sumerian statues and artifacts, and it was horrific. These things that have been around for, according to the Iraqis, 500,000 years were destroyed. So even if our technology develops further and we're able to realize that they were 500,000 years old, assuming they were, it's gone now. ISIS destroyed it. And this is one of the problems with pre-ancient history, so prehistoric, so before 6,000 years ago, is that we have a habit of destroying it because it offends us. So I'm not saying we're all ISIS, but ISIS destroyed it. Recently, a couple of years ago, Black Lives Matter went around destroying statues. Now they say, oh, that was slave owners, all that sort of stuff. Fair enough. But they were still destroying history. And just because you don't like history doesn't give you the right to destroy it. History isn't always what we want to hear, but we shouldn't be going around destroying it. And it's really sad that they did that. And the thing is, throughout history, we've been destroying history. And so that makes it very difficult. We cut noses off people, we rip wings off statues. I mean, cut noses off statues, not people. But, we deface things. And sometimes we just completely destroy it. And we're still doing that today. In fact, not only do we destroy history, sometimes we even lie about other countries that we don't like. And we all do it. So it becomes very difficult. But still, most of Sumer is accepted to be real. Bits of it before the before 6,000 years ago bit is a bit disputed, and the further back you go, the more it's disputed. Nonetheless, there's no doubt that even from 6,000 years ago, it was a very powerful civilization, and many people think it was the precursor to the ancient Egyptian civilization, which we know how powerful they were. Um, and by the way, there's no doubt that ancient Egypt is as old as people say it was, although whether the Egyptians built the pyramids, that's a different issue entirely. Some people say the Sumerians did, but the current thought is that Atlanteans did. But I'll get into that in a minute because I'm going to go over Atlantis. Um, anyway, Sumer no doubt was a very powerful civilization, and if they did exist 500,000 years ago, they would have to have been one of the most powerful civilizations in the world at the time. And they claim they were the most powerful, and they could well have been. And that brings me into the third one. which some people are going to tell me I'm stupid even to mention it. And I know a lot of Indians out there make fun of this one, and that is the kingdom of Kumari Kandan. And I might be saying that and apologise, might be if I'm saying it wrong. So this comes from Tamil mythology, and it says that south of India there was a massive continent that stretched all the way to Madagascar and Africa and out to Australia. And that in this land there was great technology and the most powerful kingdom that has ever existed. And it was a Tamil kingdom. Now, a lot of Indians, a lot of Hindus, a lot of Muslims in India make fun of this story. A lot of people that are not Tamils, they all go, "How ridiculous, stupid Tamil nonsense." And I've heard that story a lot. But there is no doubt in a factual manner or whatsoever. It's not disputed outside of these people making fun of it. It is not today, and for the last 100 years, there has been no dispute that it was a real place. So scientists accept it was a real place, and it really did exist over that area, or roughly. They're not 100% sure exactly where it was, but or exactly the stretch of the continent. But there is a sunken area that was a continent that takes that area. But scientists call it Mauritius. I'll just say they don't call it Kumari Kandan. They call it Mauritius. It has a real name. You can Google that, and you will come up, and it will tell you Mauritius, also known as Kumari Kandan. It's the same place. There's no doubt. It also has a third name, which is Lemuria. Now, that's actually where we came to find out that it was a real place. So the story is there was this anthropologist. I could Google it, but I'm not going to right now. But anyway, he was finding it was very strange that there were lemurs on Madagascar and lemurs in India, and yet lemurs don't swim. How could they have got from Madagascar to India? So he theorized that there was this country between India and Madagascar that he called Lemuria. So they started studying it. They sent underwater expeditions, and they discovered that there was, and they called it Mauritius. Now some people still call it Lemuria. Lemuria is a real place. Mauritius is a real place. Nobody lives in there anymore. And the reason it was called Mauritius was after Mauritius, where that's the only country still there that is still above water. So that used to be all above water. It's still there, and they've sent people underground, and there were people living there. So there's no doubt that there were people there. There were civilisations there. There's no doubt at all. Now, there is some dispute about when Mauritius had people there and when it sunk. And now, there are some claims that it sunk 1,000,000 years ago. Now, according to the Tamil legend, it sunk about between 65,000 and 28,000, or 28,800 years ago. And that actually lines up with fossil record and anthropological record. So this is the thing, and I'll explain why. The first people who landed in India was 65,000 years ago. That was the first time there was anyone living in India. The first time there were people living in Australia was 65,000 years ago, the exact same time. Now they say, oh, that was a land bridge that opened up briefly and people just went there coming from Madagascar or from Mauritius. But then what if it wasn't? What if actually Mauritius or Kumari Kandan was actually above sea level at that time? Well, they can't be sure it wasn't. They say it wasn't, but they can't actually be sure it wasn't. So anyway, the Kumari Kandan, according to the Tamils, existed from 1.5 million years ago until 28,800 years ago. Now, is that timeline realistic? Well, according to scientists, it started to sink about 1 million years ago, or 1.1 million. So it is within scope. But that makes it older than Sumer, because Sumer, remember, according to Sumerians, according to Iraqis, is 500,000 years old. But this puts Kumari Kandam 3 times older, 1.5 million. But it also fell a lot further away, 28,800 years ago, is older than it was destroyed. That is longer ago than both Prydain. Prydain was about 11,000 years ago, remember? And Sumer, who were destroyed about, I think it's more like 800 or 1,000 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. And of course, Iraq still exists. So there's an argument that Sumer still exists. It's not called that anymore. So Sumer sort of still exists. And yeah, Kumari Kandan was destroyed a long time ago. And of course, since we only recorded history 6,000 years ago, it shouldn't be surprising that we don't have any real record of it. And that the Tamil mythology, which would have been 22,000 years since it was destroyed, that they started to write that mythology because there was nothing written down. I mean, it's no wonder that they would have been made it sound like a mythology. Although Tamils will tell you this is factual. Now, how powerful were they? Well, according to Tamils, they had nuclear power, all this sort of stuff. They were very advanced. But according to Sumerians, Sumer was the most advanced 500,000 years ago. Now, could it have been that Kumari Kandan was more advanced than Sumer as at 500,000 years ago? And I'd say probably not. Because if we believe and we accept how powerful Sumer says it was, the Anunnaki and flight and all that, those claims are more powerful than the claims that Kumari Kandan has of itself. Kumari Kandan only claims that it had nuclear power and stuff. And also, furthermore, Sumer survived cataclysms, many of them. Kumari Kandan didn't. So this puts Kumari Kandan as significantly weaker than Sumer, at least as at when the Sumerian civilization rose 500,000 years ago. But, of course, Kumari Kandan was older, 1.5 million, so between 1.5 million and 500,000, Kumari Kandan may have been the world's most powerful civilization. And then 500,000 years ago, Sumer rose up, different area, because we're talking about south of India compared to the Middle East, Iraq. And I mean, they're not that far away from each other, but they're potentially, I think they would have known about each other, but they may not have mentioned each other in their writings because they don't want to diminish their own quality. But let's just say that Sumer, according to what Sumer says about itself, would have survived that sort of cataclysm. So Kumari Kandan can't have been powerful enough to survive cataclysms. Instead, they fled. Now, how powerful could they have been? Well, a lot of people say, well, if these are the Australian Aboriginals were weak as anything. When the British arrived in 1770, when Captain Cook came there, they were primitives. Now, that's a decent argument, but then let's look at the fact that when the Aboriginals came 65,000 years ago, they came from Kumari Kandan, what I'm going to call that, they were faced with megafauna. So megafauna were basically giant versions of all of the terrifying animals that currently exist in Australia. So these are like giant crocodiles. These are enormous everything that would just kill you. Modern day Aboriginals wouldn't be capable of defeating them. And yet 65,000 years ago, they were able to. They not only survived against them, they wiped them out. The megafauna were wiped out. So that's proof in and of itself. It is evidence and no doubt the Australian Aboriginals 65,000 years ago were more powerful than Australian Aboriginals 200 years ago. How powerful would you have to be to defeat those megafauna? Could we defeat them today? Yes, we could. We could get machine guns. We could kill them. Could we defeat them with just the sort of technology that Aboriginals had 200 years ago? Not a chance. When and let me just say, when would we have got the technology capable of wiping out megafauna with what was said to be just a few hundred people? When did we get that technology level? Maybe 1970? When we have it today. So Kumari Kandan, at least 65,000 years ago, were weaker than we are today. But they were as strong as 1970 advanced technology. So the most advanced technology that existed in the world in 1970 is how powerful Australian Aboriginals were 65,000 years ago. A lot more powerful than well, probably even most Aboriginals are today. So most people are today, and a lot more powerful than they were in 1770. So that means that at some point, Australian Aboriginals lost their technology. Now, why would they lose technology? Well, here's a suggestion for you: is that they wiped out all the megafauna. Well, like, oh, thank God, we don't have to deal with that anymore. And then went, oh, we've committed genocide against multiple species who will never walk again. They wiped them out, completely wiped them out. And there's copious amounts of evidence that it was the Aboriginals that did it. So they would have felt guilty. And they would have gone, we shouldn't have that technology. We'll only have technology enough for us to cope with our current environment. Because they became environmentalists. They deliberately pushed themselves backwards. And all of their previous feats, they resigned to mythology. It was actually them that did it. It wasn't mythological spirit people. It was ancient Aboriginals. They were real people doing all these amazing things. And that was their actual technology. Now, if you look at the Indians, what we today call Indians, they don't call themselves Indians. They call themselves their own country Bharat. That was originally Arya. And they talk about Hinduism and the feats of the gods of Hindu. What if they weren't gods? That was them, as Kumari Kandan, as this powerful, amazing group. As I've gone over into other videos, in fact, the Neanderthals did originate in what is now India. And in fact, Kumari Kandan went up and defeated them with some help from Sumer and some other countries and also the giants. But so that Kumari Kandan was powerful enough to defeat the extremely powerful Neanderthals, the extremely smart Neanderthals. We don't know what sort of technology they had. I don't know. No idea. But we call them orcs. I don't know what Indians called them, but in Europe we call them orcs. And they defeated them. And so these were powerful things. So Kumari Kandan, when their country was destroyed, could have gone into Africa. It was right next to them. They had three choices. They could have gone to Africa. They didn't go to Africa. They had the choice of going north into what is now India and going up against the most powerful humans ever to exist, which were the Neanderthals. And they took them on and they defeated them. Or they had the option of going southeast into Australia and defeating the most powerful animals that have ever existed, the megafauna of Australia. And that was what they did. So these were people that were beasts with amazing technology, incredible fighting ability, who wiped out the Neanderthals or helped to wipe them out and went and fought the most dangerous animals ever to exist. And then afterwards felt bad about it, so deliberately pushed back their technology. Is this plausible? I think it's very plausible. But we have to, in order to accept, well, the Aboriginal thing, we know that they did this. But the Indian thing and defeating the Neanderthals, we have to accept that Neanderthals were as strong as our current thought is. And they may have even been stronger than our current thought. Because if we got to understand that we had this technology that was that strong, and it would have probably developed because of the necessity of us being that strong in order to defeat these Neanderthals. So we developed technology that we had to develop because otherwise we would have been wiped out. We would have ceased to exist. So we developed this technology and in order to kill them. And that same technology was used to defeat megafauna. So when Aboriginals first came to Australia, they probably didn't come naked or with a tiny little strap of um, clothing. You know, they weren't just hunters and gatherers. These were people, they may not have had machine guns. I'm not saying that they had exact machine guns, but they had weapons as powerful as machine guns. And they went around and they wiped out those megafauna. And I'm not saying it happened in 2 days, but they went around and they were beasts. They could just wipe them out. And that we know that they did it. There's no way you can just do it with your hands or even with spears. They had something massive, something. And the ones that went out to fight against these Neanderthals, I'm going to call them orcs. And these were orcs. If you look at our stories about orcs, we were the orcs, they were the humans. They were as powerful as we pretend we were. We were as weak as we pretend the orcs were. We got it round the wrong way. And they still went there and went, you bloody orcs. So Kumari Kandan had to be pretty powerful. They weren't weaklings. Even after Sumer came in, and there's no doubt Sumer was stronger, Kumari Kandan were beasts. These guys, at the very minimum, knew how to fight. And if you talk about the Tamil ideas of how strong they talk about a lot more than just fighting. I mean, it's pretty unusual to have a fighting society that can be competitive without having some technology and other stuff behind it. So these guys were very powerful. Now, as I said, there's a lot of debate about this. There's a lot of people, particularly in India, who make fun of the idea that Kumari Kandan was real. Kumari Kandan was definitely real. But some people say there was no humans on there. It was only animals, only lemurs. Well, humans definitely existed. Even if you go 1.1 million years ago, have been around for 2.3 million. Did they exist on Kumari Kandan, or was that just inhabited by lemurs and other animals? I tend to think that there's a very good chance that a lot of what the Tamils talk about when they're talking about Kumari Kandan was true. Now, some of it might have been exaggerated a bit. They want to make themselves seem better than they were, but some of it had to have been true. Australian Aboriginals could not have survived if they were simply hunter-gatherers going up against megafauna, particularly if they were in the tiny numbers that they were said to be. I mean, Australian Aboriginals, I think there were 2 million when the English came to Australia in 1770. So if we suggest that there were, 500 or 1,000, how the hell are 500 or 1,000 hunter-gatherers? And we know how dangerous Australia's coastlines are, and the sharks and the crocodiles and the swamps and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you've got to be, are you kidding me to suggest that Australian Aboriginal 1770 technology had any hope of defeating megafauna? Even if there were 2 million of them altogether, they had no hope. They might have beaten one or two, they would be wiped out. And then they'd be hunted and extinct. They had to have been much more powerful. And if that's the same group that went to India, they were powerful there too. So that we've deliberately, I believe deliberately, I don't think it was an accident that we downgrade our technology. And this could have happened between cataclysms. We had a cataclysm. Every cataclysm was sent back to the Stone Age. We know this. But I think even with that, I think there was a deliberate attempt to deliberately get rid of the technology. And that may have happened about 25,000 years ago. 28,800, Kumari Kandan's completely destroyed. They've wiped out the megafauna and they go, okay, we need to go backwards. We need to stop being this incredibly aggressive, technologically fueled society. We need to be more one with nature. And they did. Now, that's Kumari Kandan. Next one is Atlantis. Number two. I think I should have that number one. There's actually one that's less likely than that, and that's Mu. But Atlantis, now, here we go. Maybe half the people in the world think that Atlantis was never existed. And half the people think it did exist, but it's not. It's been destroyed. And some people even think it's still real. Now, that's a very tiny minority. I do not believe that Atlantis is still real. So half think it was real, half think it was never real. So the half that think it was never real think that Plato made it as an allegory, blah 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 blah. But the half that think that it was real and that it was extinct, then they have different views as to where it is. I talked about Prydain previously with the Doggerlands, England, France, all that sort of thing. That was suggested. The reason why they actually explored the Doggerlands is because some people thought that was Atlantis, because Atlantis was said to have sunk and Prydain sunk. And actually, if you combine the stories, it sort of makes sense as to what really happened. And it seems as if, because ancient Greeks could not have defeated Atlantis if even half of the myths about it are true. There's no way that they defeated, but they could have defeated Prydain. So if you look at what Prydain was said to have been and what we know how strong they are, and then again, this is proven fact. Greece, say 12,000 years ago, and Greece has been around for 50,000 years. Greece 12,000 years ago could have easily gone over to Prydain and defeated them. They didn't wipe them out. If there was 1.5 billion people in Prydain, Greece wouldn't have been able to wipe them out. But they would have been able to defeat them and then witness Prydain sink. But Greece would have been aware of Atlantis, and even 12,000 years ago, because I think most people would have been aware of it, because Atlantis is the most powerful country, the most powerful kingdom that's ever existed, at least if you believe the mythology. Was it really that strong? So first of all, was it real? Now, we've got the myths, and sometimes myths aren't real. We haven't found it. So there's a possibility it's not real. But then we've got the Atlantic Ocean. Why do we call it Atlantic Ocean if Atlantis isn't real? We've got Atlas. If you look at a map of the world, it's called an atlas. You know, why we call it an atlas if Atlantis isn't real? We've got a titan called Atlas. We also got the first king of Mauritania was called King Atlas. He's a real historical figure. we've got a lot of the stories about Atlantis proven to be true. Not only that, but there's no actual doubt where it is. So all these things about theories as to where it might be, we know where it was still there. There's nobody living there, and there's no buildings anymore. It's in Mauritania. In fact, we know that the capital city was at a place called the Richat structure. I mean, prove that without any doubt whatsoever a few years back. A guy called Bright Insight, or Jimmy Bright. He worked it out. I mean, there were a few other people who connected some dots, but there's no doubt anymore. We found it. Atlantis was real. It was in the Richat structure in Mauritania. Still there. And the only thing that people dispute about that is because Plato said that it sank. But I think he's got mixed up because Prydain sank. That sank at the same time as Atlantis was destroyed about 11,400 years ago. Prydain was the primitive society that Greece defeated. I don't think there's any doubt that Greece would have been able to defeat Prydain. Prydain had a lot of people, so defeating them wouldn't have done much. They would have defeated them in battle. Well done on them. Good on them. They defeated a weak, primitive civilization with 1.5 billion people. Well done on them. It would have taken a bit of effort. Should be very proud. They were severely outnumbered by Prydain, but they managed to defeat them in a small battle. Well done. No, they should be proud. They really should be proud that they were able to defeat an ancient or pre-ancient civilization that existed a lot older than they did, because Prydain was said to have been around pretty much since humans have, 3.2 million years ago, so 2.3 million years ago. So Prydain would have been the first major, well, no, perhaps not the first, but one of the first major civilizations. Although I've actually heard it was 1.5 million or even 1 million. Anyway, it was very old, a lot older than Greece, much older. In fact, it may have even been before humans. It may have been 3 million years ago. So they defeated that. They did not defeat Atlantis. Sorry, Greece did not defeat Atlantis. They didn't go to Atlantis. So Atlantis was a lot further to the west. So it's on the same sort of pretty similar degrees north. So that if they'd kept going past Prydain, they would have made it to Atlantis. But they stopped at Prydain, had a fight, went back home. Never got to Atlantis. Too far away. Because Atlantis was on the western side of Africa. And they only made it to England. Stopped there. Still a little bit of a distance away. Had to travel a long way. Got to Prydain, had a little fight. Won. Went back home. Came back. Oh, it's sinking. And that's the thing. It sunk while the actual Atlantis lifted. And it's really high up. The Richat structure is really high up in the air. So there's no actual doubt that Atlantis was real, and we know where it was. So it's actually the same status as Kumari Kandan as far as that's concerned. But a lot of people are lying about it. So why would people lie about somewhere that we know definitely existed and we know where it was? Well, this is the thing. Our technology today is stronger and more powerful than the technology of Kumari Kandan, at least when it was destroyed. Because we know that if we had to fight these megafauna, yeah, they'd be scary, but we could wipe them out. So Kumari Kandan being able to wipe them out doesn't threaten us. So the existence of Kumari Kandan is not a terrifying thing to us today. It would have been 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 300 years ago, but it's not today. The idea that they had technology that was up to the standard that we were in 1970, and that they had that 65,000 years ago, doesn't threaten us. It's not threatening. It means we should be more respectful to Aboriginal people and to Indians. And Australia and India should be more friendly than they are because they're the same people. But it doesn't mean that we're emasculated. We're not threatened by that. So Kumari Kandan can exist. So we can say, oh yeah, Lemuria, Mauritius, Kumari Kandan can exist. Oh, we don't think there are people there. We don't think they're technology. But even if that was, it doesn't threaten us. But Atlantis does. The idea that Atlantis was as powerful as they were and I can get onto just how powerful they were said to have been, scares the heck out of us because this is several times more powerful than we have ever got to that in the last 6,000 years that we've been recording things. We are nowhere near even the start of the Atlantean strength. So I'll just say this. Current mythology thought is Atlantis built all of the pyramids in Egypt, everywhere else. They built them. They were mobile power generators. They allowed people to fly. They allowed people to shoot laser bolts out of their hands. Oh, that was the thing I said about Sumer. Yeah, because that was built by the Atlanteans. And Atlantis was not just an advanced civilization that sprung up overnight. It was a combination of the other advanced species. So people from Sumer, people from Prydain, which I said wasn't very strong, but they still went. People from Mu, which I haven't talked about yet, people from Kumari Kandan, all went to Atlantis to create this exceptional society that was made from all of the strongest societies in the world. And 128,000 years ago, when Atlantis was formed, so it is the newest out of these civilizations. It was the new one. So just as a recollection, so Prydain started maybe even 3.5 million years ago, before we were even humans. It's an old civilization, was never very powerful, nowhere near as powerful as we are today. Then we had the second one was Kumari Kandan, 1.5 million years ago until about 28,800 years ago. And then after that, we had Sumer, 500,000 years ago. After that, we had Mu, 300,000 years ago. I haven't talked about Mu yet. And the most recent one was Atlantis. So Atlantis formed 128,000 years ago deliberately as the most powerful civilization on Earth. And the purpose of Atlantis being created was to defeat the Neanderthals, who we call orcs. And it worked. Now, I talked about how the Kumari Kandan people went north to take on the orcs or the Neanderthals in their homeland. They did that between 65,000 and 28,800 years ago out of necessity. But that was the end of the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals died out 30,000 years ago. We wiped them out. We defeated them. At Kumari Kandan, people finished the job. But Atlantis started the job. Well, they didn't start it. We were already at war with them. We've been at war with them since 300,000 years ago. But 128,000 years ago, we put in a concerted effort. We created Atlantis. And one of the main reasons why we created Atlantis, and I apologise, I'm just going to, where is it? I might have to do this. Hang on a second. But the reason that we created Atlantis was to defeat the Neanderthals. So you might think, okay, we know Neanderthals are real. I don't know if they were orcs, but even if they were orcs, they said they might have been powerful. But why would we need to create a super strong civilization, the most powerful we've ever had, to take them out? That's terrifying. Do you understand how terrifying it is? Not just that they are a lot stronger than us, because arguably so was Sumer. Sumer, at their peak, are stronger than we are today. But Atlantis was ridiculously above where we are today. And this idea is not only terrifying because we've lost that technology, but the idea that the Neanderthals were more powerful than that, absolutely horrifying. So we had to get this strong in order to defeat the Neanderthals. Now, Atlantis was destroyed, as I said, with the Great Flood 11,400 years ago. There's a lot of documentation of this. And if you look at the Richat structure, 12,000 years ago, it lifted into the air. And this is the thing. So they went from 128,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago. Now we know what happened to the people. The people of Atlantis went in two directions. A bit similar to Kumari Kandan went to India and Australia. So the people of Prydain just died. Nothing happened to them, they just died. There's no suggestion that they went anywhere. Or maybe, I mean, some of them stayed in France because France wasn't destroyed. But the ones in the bit that was destroyed, just died. But anyway, so the Atlanteans went in two directions. So one lot went to Egypt. Now they'd already had Egypt. Egypt was a part of Atlantis already, but a lot of them moved there because that bit wasn't destroyed. So, and they already had their temples, and the people of there were worshipped as pharaohs. So that was one group. But a second group sailed, and they went to a place that they called Maya, which is South America, and they became the Mayans. But actually, there were already people there, and those people worshipped them as gods. So the gods of the Mayan people were the Atlanteans, and the gods or pharaohs of ancient Egypt were Atlanteans. They were the same people, but they went in two different directions. And they were so much more powerful than the people that lived in the areas that they were worshipped as gods. And they allowed themselves to be worshipped as gods because I guess they thought they were gods. And if you look at the history and the mythology of ancient Egypt, especially, but also South America in the Mayans, it, it is really incredible. And if you look at the mythology of Atlantis, it was absurdly amazing. And there's one other thing, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute. Atlantis was said to have a weapon so strong that it destroyed a continent, and it destroyed the continent of Mu. That is terrifying to think that we had technology that good, and not only that we lost it, but that we needed it because the Neanderthals were even stronger. So I don't know what technology the Neanderthals had, but our best of the Atlanteans could destroy a continent. And we needed that just to have a chance against the Neanderthals. And we still needed help from the giants of Siberia, the Denisovans we call them today. They were giants, we called them giants at the time. We still needed their help. We needed help from the dwarves of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines. We today call them pygmies. They're extinct now. We needed a lot to go our way in spite of that. That's terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying. If we ever acknowledge that that is real, and assuming it is, it'll change the world. Not only will our technology just go in minutes, like out of this world, a lot stronger, but we'll realise, we've got a lot of humility, that our current civilization is not the best it's ever been. Now, I don't know the population of Atlantis. It could have been as low as 1 billion, might have been as high as 2 or 3 billion. It sounds like huge numbers for me to be just casually throwing around, but when I've just talked about Sumer being 25 billion or up to 40 billion, you realise they're a lot smaller numbers. Um, but it was a pretty big area, and it was very dominant, and it ended up dominating every other area. And not only this, I'm going to say another thing. White people emerged, so this lack of melanin, this lack of pigmentation, that emerged around about the same time as the Great Flood. And this could have been a genetic fallout from a weapon, not a nuclear weapon. I mean, Kumari Kandan claims to have had nuclear weapons, but nuclear weapons don't create white people. This was some other weapon, probably used by the Atlanteans to try to stop the cataclysm that was coming, that ended up destroying Atlantis. So it didn't work. But the fallout of that was near to Atlantis and a bit north of there, and created white people. White people didn't exist until about 10 or 12,000 years ago. We claim that it came about from drinking milk, from lactose intolerance. Well, if that's the case, if you're black, just drink milk, you'll turn white. Or maybe not straight away, but maybe over a number of generations. Sorry to tell you, black people drink milk. It's not the reason. It's not where white people came from. It also didn't happen from us moving north because we're already living north, already living in cold climates. That didn't turn us white. This was a genetic mutation. That's not the only possible explanation. It could have been a virus. Could have been something like the one we just had a pandemic about that YouTube don't like me to mention. It could have been a lot of things that caused it, but it could have also been some sort of weapon by this extremely powerful civilization who were capable of destroying continents. that was sent up to try to stop the asteroids from falling. We know there was asteroids caused the Great Flood. Um, and there's no doubt there was asteroids. The asteroids came and they caused cataclysm. And yeah, they failed to stop it, and their kingdom was destroyed as a result. And after that, we sort of went, oh, if the most powerful civilization that's ever existed failed to stop it and were wiped out. Maybe we should abandon our technology a bit. And over the years, we eventually deliberately destroyed our own technology, which we've done many times throughout even recorded history, even in the last 6,000 years. We do it all the time. We keep destroying our technology, we keep destroying our history, we keep destroying and rewriting history and changing things. So this perhaps should be more believed than it is. But I think the main reason we don't believe it, why we won't do any archaeological digs in the Richat structure or around Mauritania, it's not because Mauritania is scary people and they might hurt us. It's because we're scared of what we'll find. Because this threatens us. Now I get to number one. So the least likely is Mu. So the reason why Mu is least likely, so Mu is meant to be a continent that existed east of Australia, and it's sort of triangular and not quite exactly a triangle, but roughly. And it covers an area that is currently Polynesia. And the reason why this is the least likely is because there's no continent there. It's just islands. And there never was a continent. Not only was no one ever living there, but there's no continent there at all. It's just water. So what happened? Well, according to mythology, Atlantis destroyed it, but we don't have a weapon that can destroy that. We don't have a weapon today that can destroy a continent, or even do any damage to it. I mean, yes, India broke off from Australia, which was a continent. The continent included India. You can see the little gap. It's called the Great Australian Bight. India fits neatly into it. Of course, we know that Africa and South America were once touching as well, but they were separate continents. Australia was one continent. India was attached to it. India broke off and floated over to Asia. When it landed in Asia, it formed the Himalayas. But that, as far as tectonic plates are concerned, India is a part of Australia. It's part of the continent of Australia. And this is the thing. So that happened, but there's no suggestion. No one has suggested that anyone attacked the Great Australian Bight to make India float off or to attack it. That was just some earthquake or volcanic explosion or something. But the thing is with Mu, it didn't just split off. There's nothing there. And such a weapon would be, it's hard to comprehend how powerful it'd have to be. Even if every nuclear weapon on Earth was fired into one spot, it would not destroy a continent. It would not destroy the continental plate. It wouldn't even do damage to it. So, I mean, we don't really know how India broke off. Maybe that was a weapon as well, but I've never heard of any mythology even that suggested that a weapon caused that to break. Or even a weapon that caused Gondwanaland or Pangaea to split off. But the thing is, why do Polynesians go around to these islands? I mean, did they just start at Tahiti and then just say, oh, let's go exploring for a while? Found Hawaii, go, yeah, that's a great place. Found Easter Island, yeah, that's a great place. Eventually found New Zealand, go, yeah, that's a great place. Did they do that? Because that's what we believe they did. But that's not what Polynesians say happened. So Polynesians say there were once like one landmass, and it was called Mu. And so I'm talking about mythology. So this isn't a made-up thing. This is well, arguably, some people will say that all mythology is made up, but this isn't a work of fiction. This is a religious belief. There are people that really believe this. I mean, the difference between hobbits, which were made up, and vampires, which were mythological, is that some people, in fact, at some one point, everyone on Earth believed honestly that vampires were real. Nobody's ever believed that hobbits were real. It was an invention of J.R.R. Tolkien. Mu was honestly believed and still is honestly believed by Polynesians to be a real place that was destroyed by Atlantis. So, in order for you to believe that Mu could be real, you have to believe in this weapon. And you have to believe, in order to believe that that weapon could be real, you have to believe that we had technology a lot more powerful than what we have today. Not just a little bit, but like it was like 50 times more powerful than we could. We don't even comprehend how we could get there. There's, and they didn't have nuclear weapons there. We know they didn't. But they, for them to have any weapon that could not only damage a continent but destroy it completely is hard to imagine. I mean, I know we talk about Star Wars. You've got the Death Star destroyed a whole planet, and then people talk about destroying a whole planet. But to destroy a continent, I know that's not as powerful as destroying a planet. That's pretty powerful. That's it's in between a nuclear weapon and the Death Star, but it's sort of closer to the Death Star level than a nuke. So if you think of a Death Star planet destroying thing up here, of course we had the other one in whatever Star Wars movie it was where they destroyed a whole solar system at once. But that's a planet. That's a nuke down here. You're kind of up there with continent destroyed. In other words, Atlantis may have had the technology to destroy a planet. It wouldn't be a great leap. And not only that, they actually had the refinement to destroy a continent without destroying the planet, which is even bigger technology. So in fact, that's Star Wars destroying a planet. That's the one that destroys the whole solar system. That's the one that can destroy a continent casually and cause a massive damage to everybody and probably destroy all life on Earth. Up there somewhere is the one that destroys the continent without doing any damage to anyone else. That's precision. I mean, it's like having the ability to kill somebody and having the ability to kill someone, but not just paralyzing them, just hurting them. That if you're in a fight with someone and you kill them because you can kill them, that's one thing. But if you're in a fight with someone and you precisely defeat them without hurting them, without doing any long-term damage, you have to be several times more powerful than they are. Like, if you're just a little bit more powerful, you probably do a lot of damage in order to defeat them. You might have to kill them even to save your own life. But if you're like a lot more powerful, I mean, let's say a 6-year-old child attacked me. I wouldn't have to hurt them to defeat them. I could just put my hand out and go and not even hurt them. I could probably even go like that and let them hit me, and it probably wouldn't do any damage. That's the degree of power we're talking about to not only destroy a continent, but to destroy it without destroying the world in the process, without destroying all life on Earth, without destroying all life on Earth in a certain area, because people from Mu survived. They became the Polynesians. Not only that, there's a story that the Mu people of Mu, some people call them Mu, but whatever, that they still have some of that technology hidden away in secret somewhere. Some people say that's in Atlantis. Sorry, in Antarctica. Some people say it's in USA. Don't know why. Why would it be in USA? But anyway, and some people say it's under the ocean somewhere. And this is this is really interesting. As for how powerful Mu were, they weren't said to be very powerful, but they had great healing. They were nature loving. They weren't very militaristic. They may have been behind Kumari Kandan, but ahead of Prydain. Definitely ahead of Prydain. But so if we look at the rankings of how powerful these civilizations were, Atlantis was the top. Second was probably Sumer. Third was Kumari Kandan. Fourth was Mu. Fifth was Prydain. And there may well have been other civilizations that were more powerful than Prydain. After all, Greece was able to defeat them. But I don't think Greece was, in pre-ancient times, anywhere near these sort of levels. I mean, I don't even really think that they're as powerful as Prydain, given the population difference. Now, again, we've looked in the Doggerlands. There's no real power there. There's no the hunter and gatherer. People have said no, it's not. It's clearly not Atlantis. It's not worth exploring. And they never claimed to be powerful. And there are other civilizations around that claim to be powerful. It's probably unfair to name Prydain as the fifth most powerful. They're probably nowhere near that level. They're probably like 20th, 50th. I mean, I think ancient Egypt were more powerful than them. Modern society's more powerful than them, and so forth. Well, the other four, well, except for Kumari Kandan, the others were more powerful than we are today. The Kumari Kandan is close to as powerful as we are today. And even though Mu were not as powerful as in weaponry, they had healing and such that were more advanced than we have today. So, in terms of technology, Mu may have even been above Sumer, which would put them in second spot. But Sumer and Kumari Kandan were very warlike, and or at least included warlike things, which Mu didn't have. So, if you'd had a fight between them, who was coming out on top? Well, all of them could have defeated Mu. Well, probably not Prydain, but the other three could have. And but Mu had the ability to keep surviving. They had amazing healing rituals, and perhaps even when they were attacked, perhaps they were the ones that stopped it from killing them and that stopped it from destroying the world. Perhaps they mitigated the attack so that it only destroyed their continent and didn't destroy them. So Mu is a kingdom or a civilization that has the most dispute as to whether it was real. And it was said to have existed from around 300,000 years ago to about 30,000 years ago. So it rose at about the same time as the Neanderthals, and it was destroyed about the same time as the Neanderthals. In fact, it could well have been destroyed after the Neanderthals were defeated, perhaps with the Mu, people of Mu wanting to find the last Neanderthals and keep them alive, which we didn't want to do. That's probably why they were destroyed. Now, of course, that's not what we say, but yeah, considering you've got to add in the Neanderthal thing. I also wanted to say that there was supposed to be a kingdom of dwarves or several kingdoms, and there were. These were in what we now call Indonesia, Philippines, and Malaysia. Now, they kept their uh, location a secret because there were people we now call pygmies, but what were then called dwarves, that they did go around the world, but they knew they were weaker, they weren't as strong, and so they kept where they were from a secret. We now know that that's where they were from. They're, they're from these little islands where they had no real major natural predator. Even though Komodo dragons were pretty nasty, they could have the dwarves could handle that. You know, they could manage that, but they didn't have megafauna or anything like that to worry about. They were all isolated, so they got very short, very lazy, very very weak. And and we know that was real. And we know that there was a kingdom of the giants. And that was a real place in what is now Siberia. And it's talked about by the Greeks. We all said, oh, how how silly it is to think there were giants. No, there were. Again, giants are real today. Are real today. They still exist. Um, what's his name? LeBron James. He's a giant. Um, like literally, if you're over 6 foot 6 tall, you're a giant. We have a thing called gigantism. It's a disease that makes you become a giant. We have dwarfism too, but people don't like to be called dwarves anymore. They consider it defensive. So they like to be called little people now. Oh, but you can get dwarfism. So essentially, dwarves is a race of people who genetically were like people with dwarfism. They were short, they were small. And giants are just people who genetically, as a group, all had gigantism. And they might not have actually had gigantism, but yeah. I mean, it's a bit like vitiligo is essentially people turning white. It's a removal of the melanin. So that whatever happened to cause white people to emerge was a mass outbreak of vitiligo. White people are not a separate race. If you think that white people are a separate race to Aboriginals, sorry, to black people, to Africans, and even if you think Asians are a separate race, we have some different features, that's true, but then different other people have different features too. But genetically, we are one race. There were other races. Neanderthal was a different race. Denisovans were a different race. In fact, pygmies are described as several different races. And there have been hundreds of different human races over the years, over the centuries, over the millennia, over the millions of years. But today there's just one Homo sapiens sapiens. Yeah, that's it from me. Bye bye now.